Welcome to the second episode of the podcast. My name is Jenna.
My name is Aditya M.
My name is Aditya H.
My name is Anish Ramnathan.
And today we'll be talking about staying safe and keeping peace of mind at home with Jenna Starnes, a school therapist from Lindbergh High School.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so starting off, we know that you're the school therapist at Lindbergh High School, and we know that there's a lot that comes under the name of a therapist. So we were wondering, as a school therapist, what exactly do you do?
So there's a couple of sort of different roles on campus. Like you'll hear the names of like school therapist, school psychologist, school counselor. But essentially my role is to support the mental and emotional and social well-being of the school. So that's students, that's supporting teachers in supporting students, really just to help you work through whatever it is that's coming and sort of blocking your way from achieving what you want to achieve academically and really feeling good in that environment.
Awesome. So we were also wondering, what are some of the steps to get there? So in terms of schooling and experience.
So with my role, so I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, which is just sort of a title that they give you in California. It's different in different states. For my particular role, where I can work in a school, I can work in a hospital, private practice, different settings of that nature. Generally, therapists will sort of specialize in a particular area. So I really often work with teens and young adults and their families. So to become a licensed marriage and family therapist, you have to obtain your master's degree in either counseling psychology or clinical psychology. That usually takes about 3 years. There may be some full year programs that you could possibly get out into. After that, you obtain 3,000 hours of sort of, I don't want to say practice therapy, but you have to obtain different hours in different categories, like working with individuals, children, families, couples, that type of thing. And then once you finish those, you take 2 state licensing exams. So it's a pretty long process. Most people, I think, kind of finish it in about 5 years. There might be some people who can speed through it in 4, really kind of depending on your circumstances. But for my particular role, that's the path. But if you're like a school counselor, for example, that may be just a different path where you get your master's in school counseling and you just get something that's called like a pupil personnel services credential. So there's a couple different ways to get to where I am.
Right. And we were also wondering one more thing. What's the difference between a psychologist and a therapist?
So outside of schools, typically when you hear the name psychologist, that means that they have their PhD or their PsyD versus just a master's. However, within the school setting, this is where it's like really tricky because school psychologists don't necessarily have their doctorate degree. Some do. However, you can be a school psychologist and have your master's. But primarily the difference within a school psychologist and like a school therapist is a school psychologist are really more well-versed in like special education and those types of assessments. So they'll walk you through that stuff versus like a school-based therapist may provide therapy for someone who has like an IEP or 504 plan. But they're really kind of just supporting the entire school as a whole. So general education students, and special education. Mm-hmm.
I guess now that we talked about your area of expertise, what is the relation between psychology and mental health and wellness?
So I guess if we think of like psychology, right, is essentially the scientific study of mind and behavior, right? Mental health and wellness is not only like the absence of mental illness, but it really includes like our emotional, our psychological, and our social well-being.
What do you think a student can do to try to relax themselves from the idea of having to always be at the top, especially here when you see everybody doing that? So it makes it kind of difficult for someone to not want to be on the top, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's like, I mean, it's hard because we're in this sort of bubble. You know, it's really starting to sort of expose yourself and talk to people who are not, are kind of like out of it, I guess, or who are already in college or doing something different. It's stepping back and being like, what's really important, right? Like, let's say if your total goal is to go to this top college, again, but you're sort of miserable, you're like, I don't actually know that I'm going to like that place, right? I don't know that I like the campus, I don't know that I like the kind of people or how it looks. Then you're always going to be achieving or striving for something that's really outside of yourself that doesn't fit. So it's stopping and really being like, what are your values? You know, is your top value just to be able to say, yeah, I went to this place or I've done this, or is it to just enjoy your life, right? Like stopping and being like, wait, do I really want to do that? And why? Why is this important to me? Figuring out what's important to you and going from there. And it helps if you have some friends or other peers or other family members who can encourage that too.
As a community, I think we're paying too much attention, like, like about our grades, our SAT, and all that, and we care too much about getting into college that I guess at times we don't really pay attention to how our life could be, once we're in college, right? So yeah, I definitely agree with you that it's very important to like take a step back and like look at a bigger picture.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but I also want to say like I definitely think that although like it is very stressful here, I think like this environment, this bubble I'm living in, kind of pushes me to do things that I never probably would have done in the first place. Do you think that like the primary source of like depression and anxiety here is due to this like unattainable image that we want to be at the top, or do you think it's like some other external factor that could be at play here?
I think there's kind of multiple factors, and actually even to go to your point of like the pros and cons of it, yeah, like actually like there is an optimal sort of anxiety curve. Like if you don't have enough, I hate to use the word pressure because there's a lot of it here and it's generally not super great, but we do need some amount of pressure, right? Some amount of anxiety in order for us to make step forwards and do stuff. Like if you didn't have any anxiety for a test, right? You're not really going to study. You're like, whatever, you can have this blasé attitude. If you have too much anxiety for that test, you're not going to be doing well because your body's kind of just taking over at that point, instead of being able to access what's in your mind and what you have learned. So it's finding that optimal space. And you're right, if you can achieve that, then you're definitely better off than other individuals who are in the sort of extremes around that. And as far as what causes a lot of that anxiety and depression, family pressure, right? What's important to different families. Certain families have moved here, right, specifically for the schooling. So that's an added sort of pressure piece. Some of it can be actually really good. We just don't want too much. And you want to make sure that it's making you thrive instead of making you shut down and miserable. That's really kind of how you know.
Yeah, I wanted to ask like a quick question about what you said about how like there's like the balance between like too much anxiety and like little anxiety, right? I think a lot of people here are stray much more on the end of too much anxiety sort of thing. So do you happen to know like any like techniques or any like tips to like make someone like either in the moment like too much anxiety for a test, or even like on a macro scale, like the entire like high school experience, they had to become less anxious in general?
Right. Like it's sort of like a quick one, right? If we think about what anxiety does, anxiety is alerting you that there's like a threat to your environment or a threat to your safety. Now, that meant back on, anxiety is really helpful if you actually are under some sort of threat. But what happens, because we've sort of evolved as humans, right? We can't escape our minds. We can't run away from that, versus if you're out in, I always think of like if you're out in the wild, if you're a wild animal, right? You're really anxious because you're being chased by someone. When you know that you're safe, you immediately calm down, and that part of your body switches off and you're relaxed and you can do what you need to do. But we as humans, we're always thinking about what's next. What are we going to do? What's going to happen if I don't get a good grade on that test? Then what's going to happen? What are my parents going to say? What are my friends going to say? And we keep sort of spiraling in our head. So some of the things that really help with that, mindfulness has really become a big thing. And that's part of it, right? To be able to get out of that future tripping and the catastrophizing and bringing yourself back to the present. So a lot of it, there's lots of mindfulness practices, right? But again, just when you notice if your mind is going too far into the future, bringing it back. So grounding yourself. So one of the things you can do to sort of ground yourself in the present is like noticing 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 1 thing that you can taste. So that's just using all of your senses to bring yourself to the present moment and noticing if your mind veers off, you're like, okay, nope, bring it back. Bring it back. How am I in the present? And then also deep breathing, right? Because that essentially you're calming your nervous system down by making sure that when you're breathing out should be like a lot slower and a lot longer than your in breath, right? So slowing that down can be really, really helpful. And I know those are things that people are like, oh, just do this. And it seems silly, but it totally works if you're doing it correctly.
Changing direction here, do you think there's any improvements that can be made in the school's mental health system?
Yeah, I think so. I think, within the school district that we are, I've actually been pretty impressed in terms of how much they're trying to do versus some other school systems. But it really needs to, like, everything that we kind of do regards to mental health still kind of feels like this sort of adjunct, ad hoc, throw in type thing, right? Even if we're kind of trying to do it in like an advisory or our homeroom type situation, if we're not like fully sort of prepped and primed for why we're doing this and why this is important, then we sometimes just kind of tune out, right? Unless we know like, oh yeah, actually I'm kind of anxious and this will help and let's figure it out. But if everyone isn't really like bought in, it feels disjointed.
So I guess now shifting gears towards our topic. Currently we're amidst a worldwide pandemic, right? And one of the biggest restraints is the ability to go outside. However, being teenagers, one of the main things that we love to do is go outside and meet people, go experience new places, and really have fun and hang out with friends. So one of the problems that we faced is this urge to constantly go outside and meet more people. So we were wondering, what are some ways that you think people can use to satisfy their urge to go outside?
Well, I think I'm kind of hearing like 2 different things in what you're talking about. It's one, it's sort of like, what are maybe some sort of additional like activities or things, or how can we sort of connect? And then like, how do we sort of restrain ourselves? Like when we do have that urge of like, oh man, like all my friends are hanging out together. I know they're not like doing any of the advised like social distancing or mask on, stuff like that, but I don't want to miss out, right? So how do you kind of sit on that and not jump into that and be like, no, I'm going to go, right? Because if there's ever been a time where that like fear of missing out, like it's now, right? Because you see people, and all of our families sometimes have different values or are following the rules in different ways. And again, like you said, adolescence is a time in our lives when friends and social relationships take the front seat. So, one, it's just recognizing it sucks, right? It sucks for almost everyone. And then kind of noticing that like this is really that time to sort of like reconnect to sort of your value of understanding that we're all interconnected, right? Everything that we do impacts other people, impacts our country, impacts our state, impacts our world. And so knowing that when you are taking those precautions, right, you are essentially doing your role in, 1, trying to contain this quicker, 2, saving lives. So keeping that value as sort of like a forefront, whether it's I don't know, watching TV or movie together, like while you guys are both online, or committing to do like an online workout together, or even like eating together, right? Doing homework together. All this would be like via Zoom. But if you get Zoom burnout, then texting or just calling each other, making plans for what you're going to do when this is actually over. But it's kind of like that, those different components all rolled into one.
Right. So there's a variety of online alternatives to physically going and meeting and contacting with other people.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case that we really, really want to go and meet with our friends, or, we want to go and see people in person, are there any ways that you would recommend to stay safe while also, being able to meet in person?
Yeah, I mean, kind of given, like, again, like, I'm not a medical doctor. I just kind of follow what the CDC guidelines are. If you're going to be like outside, right? Like have a picnic with other people, but be like more than 6 feet apart, and don't share utensils, don't share food, but you can be outdoors, spaced apart together, right? And it seems like, kind of based on what the CDC and those types of guidelines are, that's okay. Because there is, we're trying to balance, like, how do we sort of get that connection with others and stay safe?
Now that we're all getting into the school flow again, it gives us a good opportunity to compare to how in-person learning was. And for a lot of people, the school environment helped them stay productive.
For individuals who found that the in-person learning was much more beneficial for them, a couple of things that I would suggest with regards to that. One is obviously just having like a space that's really set up for your learning, right? So you're kind of priming your brain. Okay, I'm sitting down to this desk. This is my time to study. Some additional things that I think are helpful are like, if you're creating like a map for yourself or like a plan, like what is your day going to look like? How is that structured out? When do you have breaks? When are you off your computer? Making sure that you're getting enough sleep, like enough like food, exercise, things of that nature, so that your space between when you sit down and focus and work is different from the other things that you're doing during the day. So breaks are really important, making sure that you're like not multitasking. If you really do well by having other people with you, like if you're like, yeah, we're good at having like a study group, then grab like do a Zoom study group. Those are some of the things that we know kind of works with increasing motivation and discipline. So create a routine, create a plan, have your space, take breaks, and then really be careful about how much time you're spending on like internet, video games, or things of that nature. I mean, plan those into your day for sure as part of your breaks or your rewards. But just kind of be aware of your time.
So to wrap things up, is there anything else you would like to say? Any general tips you would like to give our audience?
I would just kind of say, like, give yourself like a lot of grace during this period. We have to be more flexible, still holding ourselves to those sort of like expectations, like higher expectations, but also knowing that there's a lot of pressure here. A lot of families are going through different things. We're very uncertain, and most of us don't like being uncertain about the future and what it looks like and how it impacts us. But no one has any answers. Everyone is going through this, right? There is no manual for how to do high school in a pandemic. None of us know, right? So we're all learning and we're all in it together.
Thank you for watching our podcast. Be sure to come back for our next podcast.